Emily Carter, David Carter, and Linda Hayes. Three names that once defined a picture-perfect family, but behind the suburban smiles lay a secret so dark it would tear their lives apart. A husband drawn into a forbidden affair with his own mother, in-law a wife who uncovered the betrayal in the most shocking way, and a family bond that collapsed into tragedy. This is the story of how love, deceit, and rage turned a quiet home into the scene of an unimaginable crime. Emily Carter lived the kind of life many people admired from a distance. Her home was neatly kept, with a white fence surrounding a yard where her son often played under the watchful eye of neighbors who believed the Carters were the perfect family. Emily herself seemed to embody that role effortlessly. She was attentive, kind, and deeply invested in maintaining the peace and warmth of her household. Her husband, David, worked a stable job in finance, often praised for his reliability and charm. He was the type of man people trusted instantly, the kind who shook hands firmly and remembered birthdays. Together, they looked like a couple with no cracks in their foundation. To complete this image, Emily's mother, Linda, was often present. She lived close by and visited frequently, weaving herself into the rhythm of Emily's family life. Linda was refined, elegant, and carried herself with confidence that drew attention. To Emily, her mother's presence was comforting, a reminder that no matter how chaotic life could become, there was always family to lean on. Yet beneath the polished surface, shadows were forming. Emily had started to notice small changes in her husband's behavior, the kind of subtle shifts that most would overlook but that gnawed at her instincts. David was home later than usual, offering vague explanations about meetings that seemed endless. When he was home, he seemed distracted, his phone never far from his hand. Emily caught glimpses of notifications lighting up his screen, though he quickly brushed them away with a casualness that didn't feel natural. She told herself he was simply under stress, that work was demanding more from him than before. After all, wasn't this what everyone in their 30s went through? Careers, mortgages, and children left little room for ease. But Emily's unease lingered. She had moments where she would glance at him across the dinner table, watching him chew slowly while his mind appeared elsewhere. Their conversations had grown shorter, reduced to small exchanges about groceries, schedules, and bills. Even their intimacy felt mechanical, like a routine carried out because it was expected rather than desired. Emily tried to ignore the tightening knot in her chest. She reminded herself that marriage was never easy, that even the happiest couples faced seasons of distance. What she didn't realize was that her efforts to convince herself were only delaying the inevitable unraveling of her carefully constructed world. Linda's presence seemed to fill the silence between Emily and David. She often came over to help with her grandson, bringing meals or simply keeping Emily company. To neighbors, it was a beautiful arrangement, a devoted mother supporting her daughter, while also enjoying time with her family. Emily felt fortunate to have such a bond with Linda, especially since she had grown up with her mother as her closest confidant. Their relationship was unusually strong, with Emily sharing secrets and worries freely, trusting Linda more than anyone else. But trust, as Emily was about to discover, can be a dangerous thing when placed in the wrong hands. There were times when Emily's instincts pricked sharper, though she silenced them quickly, like the time she came home unexpectedly to find David and Linda sitting together, laughing at something on his phone. It was innocent enough on the surface, yet the way they exchanged glances unsettled her. She brushed it away, telling herself she was being paranoid. After all, her husband and her mother were family. What could possibly be wrong with them enjoying each other's company? But the memory lingered, returning in quiet moments and feeding her unease. A life in the suburban neighborhood continued on, masking the cracks in Emily's reality. Birthday parties, barbecues, and small gatherings gave the illusion of normalcy. David played his role well, smiling when needed, mowing the lawn, and waving at neighbors as though nothing weighed on his mind. Linda, too, carried herself gracefully, stepping into the role of doting grandmother and supportive mother. From the outside, no one could have guessed that the lines between loyalty and betrayal were already beginning to blur. And Emily's intuition whispered to her that something wasn't right, but she buried those feelings beneath layers of trust. She told herself over and over that David loved her, that her mother would never hurt her, that families went through rough patches and emerged stronger. Yet in the quiet of the night, when she lay awake listening to David's even breathing beside her, she wondered why her heart no longer felt at ease. She didn't know it then, but the seeds of tragedy had already been planted. The betrayal growing in the shadows of her home was not the kind that could be ignored forever. Sooner or later, it would force its way into the light, leaving devastation in its path. The Carters' life still looked perfect to the world, but perfection has a way of hiding rot beneath its surface. Emily had built her life around trust and family, believing that love would protect her from heartbreak. She had no idea how close she already stood to a truth that would destroy everything she thought she knew. David Carter never planned for it to happen. At first, it was nothing more than polite exchanges with Linda when she stopped by the house. She was always composed, always prepared with a warm smile and a clever remark. Over time, their conversations stretched longer, sometimes in the kitchen while Emily tended to the child, sometimes in the yard when Linda lingered before leaving. What began as harmless familiarity soon took on a different tone. There was a closeness forming, an energy neither of them fully acknowledged at first, but one that grew with each meeting. It started with small gestures that seemed innocent enough. David would pour Linda a glass of wine during visits, and they would sit together as if they had known each other for decades, rather than through the ties of family. Linda would ask him questions about his work, listening intently in a way Emily had stopped doing as the business of life consumed her. David found himself looking forward to those moments more than he wanted to admit. What should have been simple in-law conversations began to carry undertones of something else, something that could not be spoken aloud. The affair did not erupt suddenly but instead unfolded slowly, almost deliberately. A touch of the hand that lingered a second too long, a look exchanged when Emily left the room, late-night text messages that started as casual check-ins and drifted into personal confessions. David told himself it was nothing, just a strange bond born of shared frustrations and loneliness. Linda, too, tried to believe it was only companionship, but the truth was harder to deny with every passing day. Each secret meeting fed their desire, and the risk of it all only added to the intensity. For Linda, the situation carried its own twisted weight. She was the mother who had always been fiercely protective of Emily, the one person Emily trusted above all else. Yet in quiet moments, she justified her choices with thoughts she dared not say aloud. She told herself David was neglected, that Emily was too absorbed in motherhood to notice the distance in her marriage. She believed she was filling a void, convincing herself she was wanted in ways she hadn't felt in years. But deep down she knew every step forward was a step into betrayal, and once she had started, she could not go back. Their encounters grew bolder. David began creating excuses for late evenings, telling Emily about work obligations that didn't exist. Sometimes he would meet Linda in places far from their neighborhood, other times in the very house Emily called home. Each time the secrecy tightened the bond between them. It was a dangerous cycle. The more they risked, the stronger the pull became. Neither of them spoke openly about the consequences, yet both were aware of the destruction that would come if Emily ever found out. Still, the thrill of it outweighed the fear. From the outside, nothing looked amiss. Linda's visits remained frequent, and to anyone watching, she appeared to be the same supportive mother she had always been. She played with her grandson, offered Emily advice, and even encouraged her to take breaks while she stayed behind to help around the house. Behind those gestures, though, her motives were no longer pure. Each opportunity to be alone with David pulled her deeper into a web she couldn't escape. David, too, maintained his mask, smiling at neighbors, working long hours, and pretending to be the steady husband he had always appeared to be. The secrecy was intoxicating, but it was also corrosive. Linda felt pangs of guilt every time Emily hugged her, every time she confided in her about the stresses of her marriage. David, meanwhile, began to struggle with the duality of his life. At night he lay beside Emily, playing the role of the faithful husband, while his mind drifted back to stolen moments with her mother. Each lie he told added another layer of tension, and yet he couldn't bring himself to end it. The affair had taken on a life of its own, pulling them further into dangerous territory. Neither David nor Linda realized how obvious their closeness had become. There were glances across the room that lingered too long, private smiles exchanged when they thought no one noticed. To Emily, it all seemed like nothing more than her husband and mother getting along, though a part of her felt uneasy. But she dismissed her instincts, never imagining the truth could be so unthinkable. The affair thrived in secrecy, but every secret carries an expiration date. Linda often lay awake at night, wondering when it would all collapse. David, too, sensed the walls closing in, but he continued anyway, unable to resist the forbidden pull. What neither of them understood was that the truth, no matter how carefully hidden, always finds its way out. And when it did, it would destroy far more than just a marriage. It would unravel a family in ways neither of them had the power to control. Emily Carter had always trusted her instincts, and for weeks those instincts had been screaming that something wasn't right. The late nights, the distant glances, the secretive phone calls. At first, she thought they pointed to another woman, perhaps a coworker or an old flame David had reconnected with. The truth, however, was something so unthinkable that it never once crossed her mind until the evidence was staring her in the face. The day she discovered it began like any other. The house was quiet, sunlight spilled across the kitchen floor, and Emily went looking for her phone charger. David's phone was sitting on the counter, unlocked. She hadn't planned to search through it, but something about the way it lay there, unguarded, felt like an invitation. She picked it up, telling herself it would be quick, just enough to put her mind at ease. What she found instead made her chest tighten until she could barely breathe. The first messages she saw were ordinary enough, reminders and casual notes. But further down she found the words that froze her in place. The language was intimate, unmistakably romantic, and worse, the contact name at the top of the screen read, Linda. For a moment, she thought her eyes were deceiving her. Linda was her mother, the woman she trusted more than anyone. But the evidence was undeniable. The messages described meetings, whispered confessions, and a love that was both forbidden and reckless. Every line felt like a dagger cutting through her. Her hands trembled as she scrolled through months of hidden conversations. Photos, private jokes, and promises spilled across the screen. It wasn't just a fling, it was an ongoing affair, carefully hidden behind the mask of family loyalty. Emily dropped the phone, her breath sharp and uneven. In that instant, her entire life collapsed. The husband she had devoted herself to, and the mother she had confided in were entwined in a betrayal so deep it was almost surreal. The shock turned quickly into fury. Her mind raced, unable to process how the two people closest to her could destroy her in this way. She felt humiliated, exposed, like her home had been invaded by a crime she hadn't even known was happening. For hours she sat in silence, trying to make sense of the impossible. Every memory replayed itself in a new, distorted light: the laughter between David and Linda when she walked into the room, the casual touches she dismissed as innocent, the moments of tension she had explained away as stress. Suddenly, all of it was clear. The affair had been in front of her the entire time, hidden in plain sight. Emily's first confrontation was with Linda. She could not hold the storm inside her any longer. When she stood face to face with her mother, her words tumbled out with the force of rage. Linda, cornered by the truth, stumbled for explanations. She tried to justify, to soften the edges of what had happened. But there was no way to undo the damage. Emily's trust in her mother was destroyed in an instant. The woman she had turned to for comfort had become the architect of her deepest pain. Her next confrontation was with David. She demanded answers, but his excuses sounded hollow against the weight of what she had seen. He spoke of loneliness, of moments of weakness, but none of it mattered. To Emily, his betrayal was absolute. Their marriage had been built on promises of loyalty, and every one of those promises had been shattered. She couldn't look at him without feeling a mix of hatred and heartbreak. What followed were days of silence and distance. Emily withdrew from both of them, unable to face the sight of their faces. At night she lay awake, the words from their messages echoing in her mind. She thought of her son, of the family she had tried so hard to protect, and felt the walls of her world closing in. Friends noticed her change, her smile was gone, her energy drained, but no one knew the truth. Emily kept the secret inside, ashamed and broken, while her rage grew stronger. And every encounter with David or Linda felt unbearable. The sound of David's footsteps in the house, the sight of Linda's car parked in the driveway, each one ignited a fire inside her. She replayed the betrayal over and over, consumed by thoughts of how her life had been dismantled by the people she trusted most. It was more than infidelity. It was a crime against the very idea of family. Emily didn't know how to move forward. Divorce felt inevitable, but it didn't feel like enough. Cutting her mother out of her life seemed necessary, but it didn't erase the betrayal. She was left in a limbo where rage and grief intertwined, pulling her deeper into despair. The betrayal had been uncovered, the truth had been laid bare, but instead of giving her clarity, it left her more lost than ever. And she began to feel that the only way out was through confrontation, through actions that could match the scale of the pain she carried. The discovery had not only destroyed her marriage and her bond with her mother, it had awakened something darker inside her, something that would not rest until it found release. What had started as suspicion had exploded into a reality that would change everything, and Emily's path forward was now set on a course toward tragedy. The weeks that followed Emily's discovery were marked by silence heavy enough to suffocate. She moved through her days like a shadow of herself, going through the motions of motherhood and housework while rage simmered beneath her skin. Every time she saw David, she felt her chest tighten with anger. Every time she thought of Linda, the sting of betrayal burned anew. The two people who should have been her pillars of support had left her standing alone in the wreckage of her life. that her emotions shifted wildly from grief to fury, from disbelief to a cold determination that something had to give. She avoided both of them as much as possible, but avoidance was never complete. David still lived under the same roof, moving around the house with forced normalcy. Linda still called, still appeared uninvited, as though pretending nothing had happened might somehow erase the truth. Emily's tolerance thinned with every interaction, each one feeling like a knife twisted deeper into wounds that hadn't begun to heal. The nights were the hardest. Emily would lie awake in the dark, listening to David's steady breathing beside her. She imagined him with her mother, whispered conversations and stolen touches replaying in her head until she could no longer separate memory from imagination. Her fury grew sharper in those quiet hours. It wasn't only betrayal she felt. It was humiliation, the kind of humiliation that made her skin crawl and her stomach churn. She had been played for a fool in her own home, blind to the lies unfolding around her. Friends began to notice her unraveling. She snapped at small comments, avoided gatherings, and carried herself with a bitterness that had never been there before. Some assumed it was the strain of motherhood or the wariness of managing a household. No one guessed the truth, because Emily had told no one. Keeping the secret made it heavier, pressing on her chest like a weight she could not shake off. She convinced herself that if she shared it, the shame would multiply. Instead, she carried it alone, letting it eat away at her sanity. The breaking point came slowly, built from countless small moments. The way David looked at his phone when he thought she wasn't watching. The way Linda's voice lingered on the answering machine. The way her son innocently asked when his grandmother would visit again. Each reminder pushed Emily closer to the edge. She began to feel as though she was trapped in a cage, with betrayal pressing in from every side and no way to escape. One night, David returned home later than usual. His explanation was rehearsed, muttered about work delays and traffic. Emily stood in the kitchen, her hands clenched at her sides as she listened. The sight of him, calm, composed, still pretending, ignited a fury she could no longer contain. All the sleepless nights, all the images of him with her mother, all the humiliation boiled over into something primal. She grabbed the nearest heavy object, the weight of it solid in her hands, and before she had even processed the decision, she struck him. The sound was sharp, final. David staggered, eyes wide with shock, before collapsing onto the kitchen floor. The silence that followed was deafening. Emily stood frozen, staring at what she had done. Her chest heaved, her hands trembled, but her anger felt strangely quiet now, replaced by a numb stillness. The man who had betrayed her, the husband she once loved, lay motionless at her feet. The house felt unbearably still. The hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock on the wall, each sound amplified the reality before her. She knelt beside David, searching for breath, for movement, for any sign that he was still alive. But there was nothing. In the span of a heartbeat, her rage had carried her into an act she could never undo. Her Emily sank to the floor, her mind reeling. She thought of her son asleep upstairs, unaware of the tragedy that had just unfolded beneath his roof. She thought of Linda, the cause of so much of her pain, and how this act would ripple outward to her as well. She thought of herself, now standing on the other side of a line she could never cross back over. The kitchen, once the heart of her home, had become a crime scene. The weight of what she had done settled over her like a suffocating blanket. She knew she could not hide it, could not escape it. The betrayal had destroyed her trust, her marriage, and now her future. She had imagined confrontation, revenge, even escape, but she had never fully imagined this. And yet, here it was, stark and irreversible. What had begun with suspicion had ended in tragedy. Emily had reached the point where her pain demanded action, and in that single moment of violence, everything she had built was gone. The silence of the house pressed in on her, reminding her that there was no undoing what had just happened. The betrayal had pushed her to the edge, and now she had fallen. When the police arrived, the quiet suburban street transformed into a scene of flashing lights and hushed whispers. Emily stood inside her home, her hands still trembling, her face pale and drained of emotion. She did not resist when officers questioned her, nor did she try to invent excuses. The truth poured out of her, raw and unfiltered. She admitted what she had done, her voice hollow, as though she were describing someone else's actions. To the officers, she seemed both devastated and strangely calm, a woman who had crossed the line and knew there was no return. As investigators pieced together the events, the story quickly took on a life of its own. A husband murdered by his wife was shocking enough, but the details that emerged made the case far darker. The messages between David and Linda told the full story of the affair, the hidden betrayal that had shattered Emily's world. The police did not need to dig far, the evidence was all there, stored in the device Emily had first stumbled upon. Each message read like a confession, each photo another piece of proof. What began as a homicide investigation had become a scandal that would shake the entire community. Linda was pulled into the spotlight against her will. At first, she tried to remain in the shadows, but the truth spread quickly. Friends, neighbors, and even extended family learned that she had been involved in an affair with her son-in-law, and the disgust was immediate. Once admired for her elegance and poise, she was now whispered about in grocery stores and condemned behind closed doors. To many, she was not just a grieving mother, but an accomplice in the moral collapse that had ended in tragedy. The most shocking revelation came when investigators uncovered that Linda had known Emily had discovered the affair weeks before the murder. Instead of ending the relationship, Linda had urged David to leave his wife and start a new life with her. It wasn't simply a reckless fling, it had been a plan, a fantasy of escape at Emily's expense. This detail turned public opinion even further against Linda. What had been seen as a personal betrayal became something far more deliberate, a betrayal plotted with intent. Emily, meanwhile, faced the weight of the law. Her confession left little room for defense. She had killed David in a fit of rage, and though her pain was undeniable, the act itself was clear. Lawyers debated whether her mental state at the time of the crime could reduce her culpability, but the outcome was inevitable. She would pay for what she had done. In court, her demeanor was striking. She appeared fragile, her eyes dark from sleepless nights, but she did not deny her responsibility. Her voice shook when she spoke, yet she accepted the judgment handed down to her. For the community, the case became more than just a story of infidelity and murder. It was a cautionary tale of how secrets corrode trust, and how betrayal within a family leaves scars deeper than any stranger could inflict. People who once waved to the Carters from across the street now drove by in silence, their eyes drawn to the house where the perfect picture had shattered. The lawn grew unkempt. The curtains stayed drawn, and the once vibrant home became a haunting reminder of what had been lost. Linda's downfall was just as swift. Though she was never charged with a crime, the weight of public disgrace consumed her. Former friends cut ties, neighbors avoided her, and even her own grandson was kept away. She lived with the knowledge that her choices had destroyed not only her daughter's life but her own as well. Where once she had been admired, now she was isolated, carrying the stain of betrayal that would follow her until her last day. Emily's sentence marked the final act in a story that had spiraled beyond repair. She was taken away, leaving behind her son, who would grow up with only fragmented memories of the family he once knew. For him the tragedy was even greater. His father gone, his mother imprisoned, and his grandmother disgraced. He was left in the care of distant relatives, far removed from the home that had been the center of his world. In the end, the affair that began with secrecy and temptation had destroyed 3 lives beyond recognition. David lost his life, Emily lost her freedom, and Linda lost her dignity and her family. The story became a reminder that betrayal, no matter how carefully hidden, carries consequences that cannot be escaped. It showed how a single choice, repeated in secrecy, can unravel everything built over years of trust. What had started as a quiet family life on a suburban street ended in tragedy that no one could have imagined. The betrayal was shocking, the crime was brutal, and the fallout was devastating. Emily Carter's story became one more entry in the long list of true crimes where love, betrayal, and rage collided, leaving nothing but ruin in their path.